Okay, so today we'll start our UV visible spectroscopy. Right? So here in this slide you can see there is a blue colored material here. Right? Here you are already acquainted with this. I think most of you have seen it, right, in your laboratory courses of plus 2 standard or even otherwise. Right? These are copper sulfate pentahydrate. This is blue in color, light blue in color, right? Or you call it azuri, right? This color. Now, not only in solid, if you dissolve it in water, as it is shown here, right? This is in solution, this is in solid state, this is in solution. Now, in solution also, you see it retains its pale blue color. Now the first question arises that why it is blue in color? Why it is blue in color? And we know from our 8th grade only we know this answer, that the color we see is that the color that is reflected to our eyes, or in this case if it is a solution, the light that is coming out of this solution is blue in color. That's why we see this blue color. Right? This is called this complementary color. Complementary color. This can be more clearly understood if you see this color wheel. Right? This is for our easy understanding that it is said that if something is absorbing in the, say, here, then you will see the color of on this side. Because this part of the spectrum is absorbed. Now see, this is pale blue in color, so suppose it's in this region, right, blue green region, it looks like this. That means copper sulfate solution must have absorbed in this region, right? So this will be the absorption, and so this will be the color. So in this case we are seeing the color first, and we are assuming that it has absorbed in the this red region. Okay, so this is what we say, that now that we have seen the color, we can understand that this copper sulfate must have absorbed somewhere in the red region, right? But see, each one of us has different capacity of their own eye, right? The color you are looking at, the blue, right? For you that might be somewhat darker. For the same solution, for my eyes, it might be a shade of green, right? So we cannot rely on our eyes, right? Manual eye, and say that this is the color and that will be the absorption band. For that we need some instrumentation technique which will exactly show us where it is absorbing, right? Now let's see if our discussion here, what we have discussed here, that the color of copper sulfate here is blue, and so it looks so it must have absorbed in the red region. Let's see actually if it is so, right? Now in this slide you are seeing the real absorption spectra of copper sulfate. So in the y-axis it is the absorption, and here it is the wavelength. Right? This means what? Suppose see in this region from 0 to nearly 500, the absorption is nearly 0. Right? That means in this region nothing is absorbed. Absorption is 0. After 500 you start absorbing, right? And the lambda max, the maximum absorption is in this region. So we call this as lambda. In a subscript we say it is max. So this is the energy gap. But why we have a broad band? We already discussed in our last lecture why we have different kinds of broad bands, right? Due to various reasons, right? We have broadening of each bands, but this is our lambda max. So this corresponds to the energy gap, right? Fine. Now this color will not depend on this lambda max, not only lambda max, it will depend on the whole absorption. See, all of the absorption, it is being absorbed up to 800 it is shown, right? So nearly from 500 or I think it is near, from starting from here, say 550, it is absorbing up to say this red one. So it is actually absorbing from all this region, right? It is absorbing. So what is it emitting out? It is actually emitting out all the these things, right? It is emitting out all these rays, and the pale blue color is actually the combination of all these, right? And the lambda max, of course, as we have discussed, that it was in the red region, and it actually falls in that region only, right? See this one. So but for our naked eyes it was impossible to pinpoint the lambda max, right? That's why we need some instrumentation techniques. And why this is our topic of discussion today? This is the electronic spectrum, right? Electronic spectroscopy. Electronic spectroscopy. This is the topic of discussion today. Why it is called electronic spectroscopy? Because this energy gap, right, is overcome by electronic transitions, right? And they involve what? They involve rearrangement of valence electrons. Valence electrons, right? They involve rearrangement of valence electrons. That's why they are called electronic spectroscopy. But more commonly, it is called UV visible spectroscopy. Why? Because these electronic transitions occurs in the UV region and the visible region. Now, what is UV visible region? Right. This visible region, you can say it is from say 360 to 800 nanometer, right? And this UV region is below it, right? So less than 360 nanometer. Anything is that is in UV region. Now, as these electronic absorptions occur mostly in these regions, right? It is called, more commonly called, UV visible spectroscopy. Right? Like in our infrared spectroscopy, actually it is vibrational spectroscopy, but more commonly it is called infrared spectroscopy. Similarly, this is also called UV visible spectroscopy. Right? Okay. Now, see the example we saw of copper sulfate. You can also again say that that is actually visible spectroscopy, because you are seeing, discerning the color and getting the information. But not only color spectroscopy, right? If the transition, electronic transition occurs in the, say, in the UV region, you will not see color. Suppose a compound absorbs in the UV region, it may, if the energy gap is large, you will not see the color in that case, but you will still call it UV spectroscopy, right? And collectively it is called UV spectroscopy, UV visible spectroscopy, as these all of them involve electronic rearrangement, means transition of electrons from one lower level to the higher level. And the selection rule we already knew, right? It is delta L equals to plus minus 1. Delta L means azimuthal quantum number should change there. Okay. Now, saying this, let us go first to the instrumentation technique, right? And we will see then the other aspects of UV visible spectroscopy, right? Now, instrumentation is very easy to think about. To perceive it, it is very easy. If you have a light source, right, a visible and UV light source, and then you have a collimator. Collimator means a piece of optics, right, lens, right, where you pinpoint, I mean you converge all these rays to a prism grating. Prism or grating means you can separate the wavelengths. You separate this wavelengths. For example, here if you say it is a white light, now you can separate this into this wavelengths, and there is a wavelength selector. What does this wavelength selector do? Because all of the wavelengths are not getting inside the sample at the same time, so if you select it, Suppose you have a prism, a white light, so you have a rainbow color, yeah, and you have a slit, right? You have put a piece of paper there with a slit there, small slit is there, right? So that only the yellow light is coming out, in this case as it is shown, right? Now this is passed through the sample solution. Here this is a sample solution. These things, these sample holders are called cuvettes, right? We will discuss this in more details later. Now this is going out, and this is coming in the sample, right? And the light that is going out, it will detected by a detector. And in this case, suppose you are looking at a sample, your eye is the detector, right? And as I said that our eyes, we cannot rely just on our eyes, that's why we need a detector like photographic plate, right? Or different things, right? The photographic plate has been used since the early times, right? It has some advantages and disadvantages as well, but that is used as a detector. Okay, so this is a very simple schematic sketch diagram of a UV visible spectrometer, but there are difficulties with this, right? You just cannot have slits like this and all that. So a modern instrument, the schematic diagram looks more like this one, right? Where you have a source, UV visible source, and we will see why two different sources are given. One is for visible, one is for the UV, right? Then it is reflected to a monochromator or splitter, right? So that is our grating, our prism, which acts like a prism. Then that is given to a splitter. Again a splitter is there who splits this beam, incident beam, into two parts. One of them is sent to the sample through the sample. Another beam of the same frequency is sent to the reference. What is this reference? Suppose you are dissolving this copper sulfate solution in water. So in the reference you will put just pure water and nothing else, right? Because that actually do the subtraction of that, if there is any impurity in the solvent itself, or there is a solvent absorption very little, then it will subtract it from this sample spectra and show this as a result. And there is a detector, as you can see. Now theoretically, what is I0 and I? I0 is the intensity of the light that is incident on the sample. I0, intensity of the line that is incident on the sample. So that is, this is the initial, right? I0. So this is same for both the sample and the reference. What is coming out? The reference, that is containing only the solvent, should not have any absorption. So theoretically it should give I0, the same intensity, it will not absorb, but sample will absorb something, right? It is expected to absorb, right? That's why it is said I. So it is the reduced intensity, right? And these are both detected by the detector, and this is given as the log of I0 by I. What is log of I0 by I and why it is called absorption, we will discuss in the last part. And all these things are done by computer programming, and as a result you see the spectrum like this, right? Now this looks very simple to look at, right? But really, if you can see, this is a very complicated piece of electronics here, right? You see a source is here, then a filter, quartz filter is there, then a monochromator, that means then a wavelength selection is going on, right? Then the slit assembly is there, so only a particular wavelength is going, and then after that a sample compartment. It is again covered very right, right? And all this part from monochromator to sample compartment is in dark. It is not open because for showing purpose it is actually open, but this is in dark, right? You see this sample chamber here, it is actually closed and it is very dark there because no outside light should enter there, it will interfere. And you can see, if you can see, there are two chambers there, isn't it? See, there are two chambers there, right? One is for the sample, one is for the detector, right? And two beams are coming simultaneously there, and it is being one is for the one in the sample, one in the reference, and they are being detected in the detector by the detector, right? And all that subtraction and all this thing is going to take place with the help of computer programming. So this is our whole setup as it is looking like. I mean, from inside, right? You can see the two chambers. So this is the double beam setup, right? The portable UV visible spectrometer, of course, nowadays are available. Those are small in structure and they have a single beam also. There is a single compartment, but these are for not for very fine purposes. They are for ready reference purposes. So but for publication purposes, for research purposes, you need a double beam experiment which can deliberately, I mean, cancel out if there is any impurity peaks or artifacts due to the sample. Okay, now let us talk about particularly the source. You need a source for UV and visible light. So for UV and visible light, see, we need to have a different source, right? For IR and rotational, we will see that one source is suitable, but for UV, no single source is suitable for UV and visible, right? You need different sources, right? So first of all, let us see what the UV and visible sources are. I mean, from 350 to 800 nanometer, right? This is the, say, visible region. For this region, you can use any tungsten filament, right? Tungsten filament lamp. So that usual bulb we used to see in our homes earlier days, right? That is fine. Filament, right? Tungsten filament is fine, right? You can use it. But for UV sources, right? So something which is less than 350, right? I mean, I think it's from up to 180 or 190. You need to use a deuterium discharge lamp, right? Or hydrogen discharge lamp, right? This is lamp. They will give you, serve as the source of UV region, right? So source is very important, of course, right? And more importantly, what will be the characteristic of the source? The first characteristic should be that it should be continuous. Continuous. Why? There should be, I mean, this tungsten filament should be such that it should emit all the wavelengths possible from 350 to 800 nanometer, right? Suppose it should not be the case like that, it is not giving you the 503 nanometer, right? It should not be like that. So it should emit sorry, all the wavelengths that is possible in that region. That should be the one of the characteristic of the source, right? Second characteristic, it should be even. Even means, suppose it should not be that one of the wavelength is produced in high intensity and one in low intensity. It should be even. So these two are the main characteristic of the source of our UV visible spectroscopy, right? Okay. Next we will discuss about this cell material, these cuvettes, right? These are, as we said, these are cuvettes, right? Now see, as you can see, one thing, they should be transparent to our naked eye. Anything that is transparent to our naked eye, right, we say that means all the light is passing through it, right? Transparent. Now, this transparent term, as we say, For example, to us this common glass is transparent, right? If you have plastics, right, I mean colorless plastic, that is also transparent. So plastics can work as a cell material, also glass, right? They are used as a cell materials, but this is possible only in the visible region, because you can see if it is colorless to your eyes, that means it is also transparent to the white light, I mean the visible region. That's why you are looking at that's why it is appearing colorless, right? I mean that's why it is appearing transparent, right? So by transparent, what do you mean? Whatever light is falling, it is it is not neither reflecting nor absorbing, so everything is passing out. That's why it is transparent. And what is black? So black, if you see something black, that means you are whatever light is falling on it, it is absorbing. What is white? White is, it is not neither it is not absorbing anything, it is not transparent, it is just reflecting back everything. And suppose there is any other color, that means it is absorbing the other wavelengths and any reflecting only that wavelength, right? So this is our concept of transparent. Now this plastic and glass is suitable only for visible region because they are transparent. This transparent means in terms of UV visible spectroscopy or spectroscopy as such, scientifically speaking, transparent means that it does not absorb in that region, right? So glass and plastic does not absorb in visible region, but they absorb in UV region, right? Absorb in UV region. So if they absorb in UV region, so they are not suitable for UV spectroscopy. That's why quartz are used, right? These, the pictures you are shown here are quartz cuvettes are used, right? They does not absorb above 190 nanometer, right? So up to 190 nanometer it is fine, you can see, right? So 800, right? So we have a long range of total UV spectroscopy can be done with quartz cuvettes, right? You do not need to worry about all these things, because mostly our organic compounds also absorb I mean above this region, right? Beyond this, that is possible. We do not need I mean below also, if you want to see your compound is absorbing or not, then you will quartz is not suitable below this one. For below this one you need alkali fluorides like lithium fluoride, potassium fluoride, right? So the cell should be made up of those fluorides, then only you can absorb below this one, because they have a cutoff near 100 nanometer, right? They do not absorb above 100 nanometer. That's why you need that. But for common purposes, it is best to have a quartz cuvette, because all our common samples like organic samples, inorganic samples, they I mean the absorption is in this range only, right? So most commonly used is this quartz cuvettes, right? Now you see, if you see this quartz cuvette, if you can see, these opposite sides are clear and these are sanded, right? These sides are sanded, that means no light should be lost from this side, right? So they are kept sanded, right? And this way this light should pass. So if when you are putting these cuvettes in this cell compartment, care should be taken that you see this is in the path length of the light, this clear sides, right? Not the sanded one. Okay, so this was the discussion about choice of cell material. Next is our discussion about the solvent. Of course, see, most of the UV visible spectroscopy is done in solution mode. There are some methods in solid phases, but very rarely it is done, and also in gas phases it is also rare. But most, in more than 95% of cases it is done, and even more, I think, it is done in solution mode, right? Now there are two aspects of choosing a solvent. Again, like the cell material, what is the cutoff? Cutoff means below which the solvent itself absorbs. See, there is a list of solvents here, common solvents, organic and water also is there, right, which have a list of solvents here. Now suppose my compound actually absorbs, I have an I can expect absorption around 210 nanometer, right? Then which will be a good solvent? Then of course chloroform, or this one, what is that, this dioxane, they will not be a good solvent, right? Water can be a good solvent, right, because it is up to 190, right? And similarly acetonitrile is a good solvent, right? So they can be used. Even methanol you cannot use, right? It is very the cutoff is very close to our expected peak, right? So that's why you have to that's how you have to choose the solvent, right? So again, this solvent should be transparent in the region that you are studying. If you are studying around from 300 to say 700 nanometer, then all these solvents are good because they do not absorb in this region. So the solvent should be transparent, right? So the solvent should be transparent in the region of study, not by just by looking I mean with your eyes that it is colorless. No, not by that. In the region of the study. Of course, in 300 to 700 nanometer, everything does not fall in the that visible range, right? So there is 300 also. Below 360 is also there. So if something absorbs that, you do not know, right? So you have to be careful about choosing the solvent. Now second point about the solvent is not only the cutoff. See, this is an picture of the, I mean the absorption spectroscopy of a particular compound, right, in two different solvents, the isooctane and ethanol, right? See, they have different structures. So this is more fine structures in this this isooctane, which is non-polar type of solvent, whereas ethanol, a bit polar, is looking like this one, right? So the polarity of the solvent also affects the the structure of the bands, right? Now we will study in more details about this in the next lecture, but here one thing you have to keep in mind about choice of solvent is that first thing is cutoff and the polarity, right, of the solvent. And of course, one of the choice of solvent is of course not in our hand, right? Not the cutoff or the this one polarity. That choice is the solubility, right? It is not in our hand. Suppose your compound is soluble only in chloroform, then you have no choice. You have to do it in chloroform, right? You have no other choice. So in that case, we are bound to do it. But in all other cases, if we have a choice of solvent, we should carefully choose the best possible. I think the best, soluble. First of all, it should be soluble, and then it should be give the maximum range. The solvent we should choose is the solvent which will give us the maximum range possible, and of course, it should not interact with the compound itself. Suppose the compound, you put a copper sulfate solution and you put acetonitrile. Acetonitrile sometimes actually coordinates with copper also. So if it coordinates with copper, it will form different complex. So the solvent coordination should also be taken into care, right? Take care of. So you should, the choice of solvent should be such that you get a big window first of all, and it does not interact with the compound itself. Okay, next is our this Lambert-Beer's law. Right. Now this will be our last topic of discussion today. Right. This Lambert-Beer's law. See here, two spectra are shown of two different complexes. Right. one in a solid line, one in a dashed line. See, there are different types of peaks. So here is one maxima, there is one lambda max, this is another lambda max, because they correspond to different energy level, transition to different levels. Okay, so this is another lambda max, this is another lambda max. Now see, on the left hand side you see the absorbance is plotted, right? There are different absorbances there. Which has the highest absorption? Okay, this one has the highest absorption. It is nearly, we can say this is for the dashed one. For the dashed one, it is 2.25. So nearly. I am not getting it accurately. This one here is like 0.6. Fine. This is even lower. It's 0.4 or something like that. Okay. See, and this absorption is actually directly proportional to the concentration. Absorption is directly proportional to the concentration, right? It is found. So suppose this is in concentration C1, right? In concentration C2, which is equal to twice C1, then this will be doubled here, and this one will also be doubled. So this 0.5 would be here, something here and here, so it will look like this one, and this again will be doubled to 5, right? So it will be something like this, right? Now see, if you increase the concentration, it will somewhere look like this one, right? Suppose the window of observation, right, is such that if you want to see this peak, the highest intense peak, then this will look very smaller, right? Isn't it? If you have a high concentration, right, then now you are limited. I mean, your screen space, your screen, or if you want to print it in a paper, right, that is limited, right? You cannot print it in a very long sheet. Now if you want to this peak, the highest absorption peak, clearly, then these things will look very smaller compared to this one, right? And if you want to see them, if you want to see this small absorption, small intensity peaks, I mean more clearly, then this thing will miss these peaks, right? These absorptions. That's why this Lambert-Beer's law come to our help, right? So one more thing you have to point it out, that from this spectra what we get? We actually get the position, that is the lambda max, right? First of all, the position of the energy bands. So we get 3 positions here, 3 lambda max, and the intensities. Intensity of this one is highest, then this one, and third is this one. So we get 2 things from a UV visible spectroscopy. First is the position. So position gives the lambda max of each band, and this corresponds to the energy gap. Fine. Then the intensity. Now if you remember, in the previous lecture we discussed what from where we get the intensity. See, intensity is directly proportional to the allowedness, right? If it is allowed or forbidden, right? Forbidden bands are low intensity, whereas allowed bands are strong intensity. See, in this case, these bands are allowed, highly allowed. That's why they are strong intense. They are allowed, but, and again, you cannot see it clearly. There is a DD band also, right? There is a DD transient. For example, this is for a metal complex, right? There is a DD band. We cannot even see it. If you lower the increase the concentration, then only you can see it. But in that case, we will not be able to discern all these peaks, right? And because that is very low intense, right? Okay, we are not talking about this allowed and forbiddenness now. So first of all, any spectra, I mean UV visible spectra, give us two things, that is the lambda max, that is the position, and the intensity. Okay, now see what is Lambert-Beer's law. That's what we started here, right? So for reporting, now if you want to show this peak clearly, you have to give one more picture. If you want to show this peak, then you have to give another picture. So you cannot give 10 pictures for 10 peaks, right? So for that purpose, we have something called absorptivity or molar absorption coefficient, right? Or molar extinction coefficient, right? So this is defined as the constant. Suppose this absorption is proportional to the concentration, not only to the proportional to the concentration, but also to the path length. What is path length? See, this is the path length, the length of the cuvette. See, this one, it's not clearly shown here. Okay, so this is our path length. This is the path length. And usually, in most of the cases, unless otherwise specially designed cells, usually it's 1 centimeter. Right? Because giving this 1 centimeter actually reduces our calculation a lot. Because Lambert-Beer's law actually says that it is directly proportional to this path length. Why? Because if it is going through a larger path, suppose this is one of the path length and this is double, right? So this incident beam will interact with more molecules here. So more will be the absorption. So ray that is coming out will be low intensity, right? Than this one. So this absorption is directly proportional to the concentration. Of course, you can understand more concentration means more number of molecules, so more interaction, so more absorption. And same is the case with path length. More the path length the light has to travel, more collision it will make with more molecules and more absorption, right? And so there should be a constant of proportionality. This is the epsilon. And how it is defined? This is defined as the absorption. Absorption when we have unit concentration and unit path length. Now path length is usually in 1 centimeter, right? And this is then 1 mole per liter. If it is the concentration is 1 mole per liter and this is 1 centimeter, then you have the absorption you have is equal to then what? Epsilon, right? And what will be the unit of epsilon? The unit of epsilon will be reverse, isn't it? It will be mole inverse liter centimeter inverse. Liter in place of liter, most commonly decimeter cube is used, so you can use that also. But this is our absorption coefficient. It is the molar extinction coefficient or absorption coefficient, right? So you do not have to give all these things, I mean the pictures, right, to show. For this case, you see, now for 3 different things we can directly say what is the epsilon value. Now whatever be the concentration, right, this will be same, right, this will be same, because this is the constant for a particular case, right? This is the constant we have seen, because it has the definition, because this is the absorptivity. And now, okay, one more thing, this is not a constant for a particular compound, right? And in all wavelengths, this is for a particular wavelength. This is good for a particular wavelength, for that lambda max, right? For each wavelength there is a different epsilon. So the last picture that we have seen there, right, it has 3 peaks like this, right? So 3 lambda max, we have to report it. So one, see, lambda max, suppose we have at what? We have at say 250, 300 and 450. So we say 250, right, and you say the epsilon there like this, something, right? So 300 you report epsilon there, and 450 and you report the epsilon there, right? So one, if you see this data, you will clearly understand that this one is the least intense, this is the highest intense, and this is the middle intensity, right? So epsilon is very important to report this UV visible spectroscopy, right? Now let us say do one example. Suppose it is given, the concentration is given 2 into 10 to the power minus 3 moles per liter, right? And the path length is 1 centimeter, right? And this absorption here, it is 1.5. Then what will be the epsilon? See, you can easily calculate it by putting these values here. So epsilon will be what? 1.5. I mean, first let us write. So absorption equals to epsilon C into L. So epsilon equals to A by C L. So A is our 1.5, C is 2 into 10 to the power minus 3, and this is 1. So whatever value we get, it will be in the region of say 1.5. So it will be like, yeah, it will be 0.75, right? 0.75 into 10 to the power 3, right? So it will be 7.5 into 10 to the power 2 mole inverse liter centimeter inverse. So this will be the this one. See, if the absorption of the peak is now say 6, suppose the absorption came here as 6, right? Then for the same compound, now it is the same solution, so the concentration remains same. Now if the absorption is 6, then the epsilon becomes what? Epsilon becomes here 3 into 10 to the power 3. See, so that means it is now nearly 5 times, if not 10 times, it is 5 times more, right? So that means 5 times more intense, right? So this epsilon actually for a compound can range, for example for inorganic complexes, these epsilon can range from few numbers, right? Say from ones or tens, from tens to nearly 10 to the power 4 also. So there are different depending on forbidden absorption to much allowed transitions. Like for charge transfer spectra, I mean absorptions, like that of say KMnO4, potassium permanganate, you have seen that compound, right? Very intense purple color. That color is due to charge transfer spectra, and that is highly allowed, and that has an epsilon of 10 to the power 4 or 5, right? Whereas this suppose you have a copper, a manganese sulfate, right? Manganese sulfate, very pale pale pink color, very pale. It has a epsilon of nearly intense, right? So this higher the epsilon value, higher will be the intensity of the color, right? Now if it falls, this epsilon falls in the UV region, you will not see the color, but it may have high intensity. In most of the organic complexes you will see the organic compounds that these epsilon values are very high, intense, but they absorption and intense, but they fall, unfortunately fall in the UV region. That's why you do not see the color. But as is the example of potassium permanganate, or that is highly intense in color, because that is strong, I mean that is allowed, that epsilon is very high, right? Now if you compare potassium permanganate and copper sulfate that we started our discussion with, copper sulfate is also very pale blue. The epsilon is very low compared to that of if you say for a same concentration of copper sulfate and another potassium permanganate, the potassium permanganate solution, it will be difficult for you to look through, right? It will almost be opaque, right? Because it is so intense absorption, whereas for copper sulfate is very pale because their intensity is very low, the absorption is very low. Okay, so this was the preliminary discussion about electronic spectroscopy. Next day we will discuss Frank Condon principle and this particular transitions and their absorption areas, energy areas, and the lambda maxes. Okay.